What did Princess Aerea Targaryen and Balerion the Black Dread discover in Old Valyria in Fire and Blood? What could possibly have damaged Balerion like that and got under Aerea's skin? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. On this channel we cover George R. R. Martin's World of Ice and Fire in depth, as well as other great fantasy worlds like The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher. Welcome. Perhaps the most visceral and talked about moment in Fire and Blood was the strange incident of Aerea Targaryen, Balerion the Black Dread, and the Wyrms. If you've read the book, you'll know that this was, out of the blue, a very dark and horror-driven moment in an otherwise sometimes quite factual in-world history book, so treat that as a content warning. The story starts a few years into the reign of Charis I. Rhaena Targaryen, Aerea's mother, was at the time based in Dragonstone with Aerea, much to Aerea's disgruntlement. Aerea was an inquisitive, restless, adventurous girl who found herself taken away from the excitement of King's Landing and dropped into the dreary, quiet lifestyle of Dragonstone. She became frustrated and lonely. The only person she seemed to have formed a bond with, Alyssa Farman, probably didn't help much with this, as she kept talking of sailing off beyond the horizon and having adventures, and indeed, eventually, Alyssa Farman left to have those adventures. Yes, this is the same Alyssa Farman who stole the dragon eggs and set off across the Sunset Sea. We'll look at her in more detail in a future video. But the impact on Aerea is what matters to us here. Oh, and if you've read the book, then you'll probably know that this probably wasn't Aerea, but her twin sister. There's a whole other story there, but for our purposes, we'll keep calling her Aerea, as the writers of Fire and Blood did. Aerea cried bitter tears at Alyssa Farman's departure, and after she'd gone, became miserable, terrorising the denizens of Dragonstone, being horrible to the servants and generally unpleasant to be around. She was 13 years old. When Queen Alysanne paid a visit, she begged to be allowed to go with her back to King's Landing, but her mother didn't allow it, and Aerea just got worse. And so she took matters into her own hands. She crept into the yard, mounted Balerion, who was sleeping there, and flew off. The fact that she took a dragon is not a surprise. She was a Targaryen after all, and had been encouraged to try to bond with the dragon by her mother. The fact that she told no one what she was planning is also not a surprise, because who would she tell? Her only friend had gone already. But why did she choose Balerion? Well, we could chalk it down to youthful exuberance, but we should also pause to note that Aerea wasn't just a random Targaryen cousin, say. She had grown up as heir to the throne, named first by Maegor, then Jaehaerys, and Balerion was the Dragon of Kings, so yes, that makes sense too. Where they went, we aren't told, only that they were gone a long time, over a year it would seem, while a massive search went on. But then, unannounced, they returned to King's Landing. Balerion landed. Aerea slid from his back, clearly dying of some strange something. Sir Lucamore Strong, a member of the Kingsguard, discovered her first. We read that the girl was flushed and burning with fever, her skin so hot he could feel it even through the enamelled scale of his armour. She had blood in her eyes as well, Sir Lucamore claimed, and there was something inside her, something moving that made her shudder and twist in my arms. And there was more. She was carried inside, and Grand Maester Bennifer and Septon Bath tried to save her, but she was getting worse, burning up gruesomely from inside. Eventually, Bennifer and Bath tried plunging her into a bath of ice to see if that would help. Septon Bath recalls that the shock of that immersion stopped her heart at once, I tell myself. If so, that was a mercy. For that was when the things inside her came out. The things. Mother have mercy, I do not know how to speak of them. They were worms with faces, snakes with hands, twisting, slimy, unspeakable things that seemed to writhe and pulse and squirm as they came bursting from her flesh. Some were no bigger than my little finger, but one at least was as long as my arm. Oh, warrior, protect me, the sounds they made. They died, though. I must remember that. All rather horrific, but what are we to make of it? Well, let's start with the basics. It certainly appears that whatever idea Aerea had flying to King's Landing, tracking down Alyssa Farman, or just going for a few circuits of the island, she wasn't in control. The only words of explanation we have from her later were, "I never," which could mean anything, but given the context of a teenage girl just returning from going missing for a year, and with things having gone seriously wrong, it sounds as if "I never" would have been followed by an assertion that she never intended for all that to happen. Balerion seems to have looked after her, not dropping her into the sea, for example, but they went where he wanted, not where she wanted. Incidentally, there are definite shades of Daenerys and Drogon here. Drogon is often compared to Balerion because of his colouring and size, and the time when Dany flew off on Drogon into the Dothraki Sea and couldn't control him has definite echoes of this incident. And also, in House of the Dragon, we get Viserys claiming that the idea that we control dragons is an illusion. Viserys was the next to ride Balerion after Aerea, and his first, and as far as we're aware, only flight was to circle King's Landing when Viserys had planned to fly to Dragonstone. So, where did Balerion and Aerea go? Well, east seems like a reasonable bet. There were no sightings of Balerion anywhere in the Seven Kingdoms, nor indeed any reliable sightings in the Free Cities, other than the other side of the Narrow Sea. Septon Barth is probably right in suggesting that Balerion, like Drogon centuries later, wouldn't have just kept on flying, but instead stopped somewhere and nested in a cave or some such. This will have to have been well away from civilization in order for them not to be spotted, and the natural flight path there and back should also be free from any large cities. And when they got wherever it was, two things happened. Aerea got those horrible worm things in her, and Balerion got hurt by something big and very dangerous. It is said that he had half-healed scars and a 9-foot-long wound down his side that was still bleeding when he landed. So it sounds like he was attacked at least 2 times, and the second time was just before returning. Whatever it was must have been pretty massive and deadly to leave a scar that large, piercing dragon scales, and it would appear to be the thing that prompted Balerion to return to Westeros licking its wounds. So, what and where? They could, of course, have gone to lots of places, but 2 stand out as most likely. The first is Sothoryos, the giant southern continent. We don't know huge amounts about it, but we do have some more information in Fire and Blood, and it is intriguing. We read this: strange creatures, wyverns, basilisks, 100 different sorts of snakes, deadly, all of them. The fresh water is no safer in that place. There are worms in it, almost too small to see. If you swallowed them, they laid their eggs inside you. It's not exactly the same as we saw with Aerea, but worms that lay eggs inside you, wyverns that we read elsewhere are so large people mistake them for dragons, diseases that make you waste away, fevers. Yes, this could be where they went. But of course, there is somewhere else that fits the facts even better, as Septon Barth suggests: Valyria. It fits because if we assume that it was Balerion that was in charge, which seems likely, then where else would he go? Balerion was born in Old Valyria, so perhaps he had some kind of homing instinct as he got old, and he was a very old dragon at the time. George R. R. Martin's recent Dragon Lore blog post made it clear that dragons don't just fly off to random places. They are either flown there deliberately, or there is a very good reason for it. So if we exclude the idea that Aerea decided to fly off to somewhere ridiculously dangerous and stay there for months, then Balerion flying home to Valyria it is. But what could have caused what happened to Aerea and Balerion in Valyria? Well, after the Doom, Old Valyria had become an incredibly dangerous place, a smoking sea and a broken peninsula. Few ever venture there, and of those that do, even fewer ever return. In the immediate aftermath of the Doom, there was one Dragon Lord named Orion who survived because he happened to be in Qohor at the time. He amassed an army of 30,000 soldiers and marched on the ruins of Old Valyria, with himself flying above them on his dragon. They were all destroyed, every single one of them, as was the dragon. By what, we don't know, but other attempts followed and all perished. Clearly whatever survived the Doom outmatched armies and even dragons. Perhaps this shouldn't surprise us given what we know about what the Valyrians were up to. As Septon Barth again says, the Valyrians were more than dragon lords. They practiced blood magic and other dark arts as well, delving deep into the earth for secrets best left buried, and twisting the flesh of beasts and men to fashion monstrous and unnatural chimeras. Twisting the flesh of beasts and men to fashion monstrous and unnatural chimeras sounds like giant worms with faces and hands, like we saw with Aerea. Of course, that was all centuries ago and before the doom of Valyria destroyed everything. Whatever those unnatural chimera were, could they possibly have survived the doom? Well, perhaps. Everything on the surface surely perished, but what if some of those unnatural chimeras were underground and the heat was not a problem for them? If so, then yes, they could have survived and thrived in their new conditions, not being manipulated by their Valyrian creators. And we do hear of those exact right conditions existing deep, deep under old Valyria. And, well, this is what the kindly man told Arya. The mines of old Valyria were always hot, and they grew hotter as the shafts were driven deeper, ever deeper. The slaves toiled in an oven. The rocks around them were too hot to touch. The air stank of brimstone and would sear their lungs as they breathed it. The soles of their feet would burn and blister, even through the thickest sandals. Sometimes, when they broke through a wall in search of gold, they would find steam instead, or boiling water, or molten rock. And there were worms in that red darkness, too. There were worms living in molten rock in Valyria, worms that will probably have survived. Could these be what got under Aerea's skin, and a much larger one, what attacked Balerion? It seems the most likely conclusion. The thing about Valyria is that although we know that people don't go there now, whatever is there is apparently capable of destroying both vast numbers of humans, to the very last one, and dragons, as we saw with Orion's dragon right after the doom. So Balerion flew to Valyria because that was where he was born, was attacked by some unnatural fireworm that had survived the doom, and Aerea, probably needing to eat and drink anything that was to hand just to survive, got infected and inhabited by those smaller unnatural chimeras which grew in her. She probably only survived as long as she did because she was a Targaryen. They were clearly creatures that needed heat and generated heat, and as a Targaryen, she has a certain amount of heat resistance. Targaryens aren't fireproof, of course, but their bodies are okay with a lot more heat than normal humans. That didn't stop the pain, of course, and when her body shut down in that ice bath, it was a mercy for sure. So what does all this mean for the wider story? Why did George include it in such visceral detail? I think it's at least partly to remind us of a few things that, as the story of A Song of Ice and Fire has progressed, we've kind of taken our eye off of. First, dragons cannot easily be controlled, particularly old and powerful dragons. We get so used to the idea of Targaryens climbing atop dragons and taking them wherever they want to go. It happens all the time in Fire and Blood. But this, and what happened with the dragon seeds, with Silverwing at the wall, and a few more times in semi-canon House of the Dragon, reminds us that it takes time to build up a bond with a dragon, and even then, they are their own creatures. In the books, Dany was flown against her will into the Dothraki Sea by Drogon, and her other two dragons seem equally independent-minded. Dany won't be arriving in Westeros with 3 tame dragons who will just do her will. There are a whole load of other layers to the equation too. Dragons are not easily tamed, except perhaps with a powerful magical item like Dragonbinder that apparently can control dragons. Expect this to play an important role in the books. Second, George is reminding us that dragons are vulnerable. Balerion was the mightiest and most frightening creature in the known world, with thick dragon scales, invulnerable to pretty much anything that humanity could manufacture. But he was damaged seriously not just once, but twice. Dragons are vulnerable, and we shouldn't expect all 3 of Dany's dragons to survive the story. Third, Valyria is a scary place. We've kind of lost sight of this with Euron's claims to have been there and returned unscathed, but if he actually did, and it seems possible, it is quite an astonishing achievement. Literally thousands of people have been there and not returned for good reason. It underlines that Euron is more than just a support act for Cersei or whoever. He is one of the exceptional people of the age, dangerous and insane to be sure, but remarkable and brilliant nonetheless. He is not going to be a bit-part player in the books. He is going to be one of the most important protagonists in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. And finally, all this reminds us that George R. R. Martin loves to write horror, and the most horrifying and disconcerting parts of A Song of Ice and Fire are surely yet to come. It will get darkest just before the dawn. But what do you think? Do you agree? Let me know in the comments below. If you'd like to see more videos digging into Targaryen history and the wider world of Ice and Fire like this one, there's a playlist appearing now on the left of your screen. Or to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.